Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming. This is our CS Ed Week event from AI for CA, and we're calling it Teaching Impacts of Computing with AI. So I'm so glad you're here. There's a bit.ly link at the bottom of the slides that you can go and follow along if you like. I'm also putting the link into the chat. You can see all of our slides at that bit.ly, and you can also check out all of our resources, including any material that is referenced today will be on the website, at least by tomorrow. And also the recording for this will be as well, including our breakout sessions. So if you want to share this with anyone else in your community, you can just send them over to csforca.org/AI. So my name is Emily Tomford. I am a computer science professor at Reach University, and I am very happy to be joined here today by the chair of AI for CA, Daniel Ritchie. Say hi, Daniel. Excellent. He's a grad student at UC Irvine. And our wonderful AI for CA volunteer members. This is an entirely volunteer-run organization. We are a project of the K-12 Teaching and Learning Workgroup of CS4CA. So we have Mark Miller and Vicky Sedgwick and Mark Lowndy and Mark Johnson and Kat Goyette and loads of other people who are going to be farther and farther down. Oh, Amy Iguchi's here, lovely. And so you are welcome to be part of our community at any time. We meet once a month. They're open meetings, and you can help to contribute to projects like this webinar. So without further ado, about AI for CA, we have 3 guiding principles. First, that AI is a part of CS, right? Is a subset of computer science. It is not something that's competing with computer science. Second, that the AI community is diverse, and that includes all of you. So please, we embrace you coming to all of our meetings, all of our sessions, and bring around other people. You don't have to already be an AI expert to be here. We are welcoming of all people. And third, that AI should be easy to teach. We're going to start with a fireside chat on the history of AI. And I'm really interested to hear about this because I like to look back at how far we've come and use that to inform really where are we going. So Mark Miller is going to be our interviewee for this fireside chat, and I really struggled to fit his bio on one slide. Mark, you have done so many things, from MIT to Apple to TI to Silicon Valley CSTA, which we're glad to have you for, and teaching college. So I will not dig too far into that because Mirelle is going to be asking the questions. She has finished her degree at University of California, San Diego, and has been working as a curriculum developer in the computer science space, which I am so excited about. I've had the opportunity to work with both of these people. They are fantastic, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to ask and answer. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share here, and we are going to bring to the stage Dr. Mark Miller and Mirelle Castañeda. Take it away, Mirelle.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, and it is an absolute pleasure to meet you, Mark. I have so many questions. I'm sure everyone else also is eager to ask some questions, so feel free to write those in the chat at any time, and I will try to put them in there, or maybe someone else can call them out. I wanted to start first by asking you if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in AI.
Okay, well, I think I got asked to do the history based on my age. I've been doing this stuff for a while. So I became interested in AI actually as an undergraduate at UC San Diego. So I like your choice of school for undergraduate. I studied under 3 people who actually made contributions in cognitive science and AI. One was Don Norman, and also Dave Rummelhart was there, who was one of the early connectionist people in cognitive science, and also Dave Lindsay. And my first job there was actually to build a model of human memory in ALGOL on an old computer. People don't even use ALGOL anymore. But they got me very interested in the field of AI and this relationship to psychology, which is where cognitive science came from, the intersection of those, and feels like linguistics. So I went off to MIT to study AI, based on a book I read by a guy named Marvin Minsky, and the book, and also Seymour Papert. The book was called Perceptrons, and Perceptrons was very hot at the beginning, and then it sort of faded away, and now it's actually become a huge part of how we do AI.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned a lot of words there. One
Yes.
of the things that stood out to me was this last perceptrons. Is that how you
Right.
pronounce it?
Yes,
Uh,
perceptrons. Mhm.
okay. And this was at the beginning. So did you get started with AI when it was just the field of cognitive science? Was AI already embedded within cognitive science at the time?
So the term cognitive science was invented by Roger Schenck and Don Norman while I was an undergraduate at UC San Diego.
Mhm.
And the field of AI started before then. In fact, you can trace field of AI back to the ancients, but especially started in about 1957 was when it really became a formal field of research. Yeah, I started out thinking I'm a psychologist and I'm interested in how computation can tell what computation can tell us about how humans think. And it became more and more, I'm interested in artificial intelligence. And oh, by the way, it tells us something about how humans think, maybe.
And what did you find?
So, well, I found, as I think everyone in the field at that time found, is that it's harder than it looks. Even as we're seeing right now, every time there's progress in the field, there tends to be generation of a great deal of hype and overpromising, which is often followed by disillusionment and loss of funding. And then, time passes, and then one of the ideas comes back into vogue, or a new idea comes along, and
Right.
it's revitalized. It's one of those things that uh, can be very emotional for people. I think of it a lot like the Copernican revolution, actually, in that what if the human mind is not the center of the universe? You know,
Whoa. Okay.
so,
Okay. Before we branch out into larger topics, that becomes very deep really quick.
right.
Um, I wanted to ask so we can have this uniform definition of AI in like one sentence, two sentences. How is AI a part of CS?
So
Or
CS,
what is the
in my
relationship?
mind, it actually had, in some sense, the ultimate goal of CS is to create AI, but
Mm,
that's a little bit of a narrow view, perhaps. But uh, artificial intelligence, to have a definition, is the
mhm.
study of how to make machines do things that when humans do them, we consider them to be intelligent.
Okay.
There you go.
What kind of, right, yes, I'm following. What kinds of problems does this solve for us on a daily basis, or in if you can give us examples of various fields?
Well, there are many, many fields today that are using some aspects of AI to do, whether it's marketing or design, or I mean, nowadays, even computer scientists use AI tools to do computer science.
Yeah.
So pretty much in every field, it's having an impact. Pretty much in every field, I'd say the impact has varied over time and it's increasing. And not all the impacts are positive, but many are because they make people more productive. And they also give us insight into things like, well, how do people think and how do people learn?
Interesting. Okay, so if we're learning about how not only how to make our lives easier, how to be more productive, how we think, um, is this specifically problems that generative AI solve? Can you tell me about generative AI and the different types of AI? So would a different type of AI solve a different kind of problem?
Well, that could take us into a lot of the history since the late 1950s, because the first successes in AI, where people would remember them and so on, were actually what was called a symbolic approach to AI. The idea was could we represent knowledge in the form of symbols and then have mechanical ways to manipulate the symbols so that they could do things like mathematics and reasoning? And there's a whole period leading up to a point where so much had been promised. I mean, the founders of the field had actually promised DARPA and so on that within one generation, we will have human level artificial intelligence available. Well, I was in that generation. We didn't quite get there. And funding dried up, and we have what was called an AI winter, where there was no funding. Actually, we had a couple of AI winters along the way. The current modern style of AI, one of the big types that you see is what you call generative AI, and this is things like the large language models like Chat GPT and DALL-E, and there's a number of other ones, of course. And those are
Right.
based more on what you would call artificial neural networks of various flavors that are attempting to, in some sense, model how the human brain works in terms of neurons and axons connecting to dendrites and that sort of thing. And a lot of it is about a probabilistic adjustment of weights to match the inputs to the outputs.
Okay. Um, so we're talking a little conceptually about generative AI and how that includes ChatGPT and what was the other example you gave of?
DALL-E, which is used
Oh,
in generating graphics.
okay, generating graphics, like I can prompt it, I need an image of a chimney.
Right. And it's actually surprisingly good, not as good as I would always like, but one of the uses I found for it as a faculty member is trying to make my slides when I'm doing a presentation a little bit more interesting by generating a relevant graphic.
Right, when you need a very specific image
Yeah,
to illustrate an idea. Okay. And we have ChatGPT that will answer prompts to an infinite number of things, right? We can ask it anything from like a recipe to
right.
create a lesson plan. I wanted to ask about the term deep fakes. I've heard of it. I don't know what that means. Is that under the branch of generative AI?
I guess I would say yes, although, I mean, there could be other ways of building a deep fake, right?
What
But
is a deep fake?
so a deep fake is essentially a form of media, usually a video with audio, where you've taken enough data about, say, a particular individual to where you can recreate their likeness and the sound of their voice and so on sufficiently well that you could make them say anything you wanted, whether or not they actually said that, which is very scary.
Yes, that reminds me of this news article, or I don't know, I think it was also a video, and it showed like the worry that parents might have in sharing their kids' images because it can put it all together and recollect information about someone and mimic them and make them sound like them and say what they would say. So yeah, definitely very scary. Okay, so that's what a deep fake is. It's
Mhm. But there's
is
also
it
reasons why you might want to have a tool like that. An
yeah.
example was I worked on a system at Apple where we were trying to train people in what was called consultative selling.
Hmm,
So you're trying to understand the user's needs, and then you could recommend which Mac to buy, basically, or if you will.
I see.
And so it's an example of using AI in education and training. Uh,
Right.
the thing we wanted to be able to do is to be able to have text information and then have a simulated human in an interaction of the scenario for each individual user. And at the time, this sort of technology wasn't that far along, and it was more based on the symbolic approaches earlier. So there wasn't a lot of data on how to do that. But now I look back and said that we could have easily done that now.
We can also use deep fakes for academic purposes, such as recreating a historical figure to ask them questions,
Absolutely.
and they will answer
Yeah.
in the way that that person
Yeah.
might have answered using that data. Okay.
Provided you have enough information about what they looked like, you probably don't have information on what they sounded like if they're a historical figure.
Right.
But we did have a similar thing happen with the Beatles, restoring some some data about one of the Beatles and producing an album with one of the people on the album already being dead when it was made. But
Right. And I think we've attended, I attended one of our meetings and we talked about how not only is it, a lot of unknowns and it can be very scary and potentially like harmful, in many ways, right? If someone like mimics something, sells a product that isn't theirs, or however many things people can think of, there's equally as many positive things that can be generated with deepfakes and ChatGPT and AI tools. Um,
Well,
and
it depends on where we put our energy and
exactly,
what
exactly.
ethical framework we bring to our work.
Right. We have to continue to create policies as the technology is developing, in order to make sure that we're um, not getting out of hand here. There's a question by Mark. We're months away from deepfakes becoming. Uh, is the
Oh,
question
fair comment, Mark. I think you're
Yeah,
right.
no, go up one more.
Quite right.
one more?
Questions
But
higher
you
up.
wanted to ask about the
How
early.
about it? How about if I just
early-
ask it?
Yeah.
Back in the early days, I was just wondering if you guys were just, sitting around over a cup of coffee, uh, did anybody perceive that there might be risks to AI? And if so, what were they? Back then, what were you thinking?
Yeah, so let me give one example. Uh, there's a professor at MIT named Weizenbaum who built a system called ELIZA, which was a chatbot. And it was surprisingly good. And people liked to play with it. The people who had no technical background would start pouring their hearts out into this basically thing that was just rearranging sentences, if you will. So not nearly as good as something like ChatGPT. And then a guy named Colby came along and he actually built a Rogerian psychotherapist based on the Weizenbaum technology. And people would actually then be sort of psychoanalyzed by this chatbot. And it was so scary that Weizenbaum became completely, from being one of the great famous dissertations in AI at the time, to staunchly opposed to the work that was going on in the field because of the concern that it might be misused in such a way. And he actually produced a book called Computer Power and Human Reason, which was one of the strongest criticisms of the AI field from someone within the field that I think ever came along. So it's quite interesting. And so even in those very early days, like, oh, we can make a chatbot. I mean, the chatbot that he made could now be built by a high school student in Python as a, 1-week project or something. And that was a PhD dissertation at MIT at the time. So, but it already, those questions had begun to arise. So.
Similar to that question, the question that people have now, Ryan posted, he said, my parents are worried about AGI coming to fruition due to the movies like Terminator and The Matrix. What are your thoughts about both AGI and how AI is represented in pop culture? And before you do, could you define AGI for us? Thank you.
Yeah, so AGI means artificial general intelligence, which basically means, human level intelligence. You could have a conversation with it in the same way that I could have a conversation with you,
You won't even notice the difference?
and you wouldn't notice the difference. And that actually is one of the canonical tests for artificial intelligence, dating back to Alan Turing near the end of World War II. Is called, the imitation game was what he called it, but everyone else calls it the Turing test, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I could talk to you over a terminal, so I couldn't tell if it was a person or not that way, for as much time as I wanted, if I can't tell whether it's a person or a computer, then if it were a computer, you'd have to admit that it was intelligence. Now that actually turns out to be not a strong enough definition, but it was a common test that was used for a long time, and you could win awards for passing it. So let me talk about this question of artificial general intelligence. There's two aspects that I hope people will understand. The first is that what we're seeing today, as surprisingly good as they are sometimes, is nowhere near being artificial general intelligence. In fact, the generative AI systems, to oversimplify a little bit what they're doing, they're taking long strings of words or tokens that, basically are words, right? When I say long, I mean billions, right? And they're using the probability of one word following another one based on having analyzed the whole internet, right? To decide what word should come next.
Mhm.
And it's surprising even to the people who developed this stuff that it comes out as interesting as it does, right? But there's no real sense in which it understands what it's saying. Right?
Okay.
Does it's basically in some sense arranging patterns of words based on the probability that they occur that way on the general internet. Okay, that's what's going on. It's surprising how well it works. Now, having said that, do I think AGI is possible? And this becomes a debate among philosophers in some sense. And what it comes down to ultimately is, do you believe in mind-body dualism? Do you believe there's something inherent about a human brain that it is not subject to the laws of physics? And if you believe that, then your answer is no, it'll never happen. If you don't believe that, then you have to admit that at some point, if we work hard enough and long enough, we may figure out how to build that, or even greater than human intelligence. And then should we be afraid of that or not? I would say I'm much more afraid of climate change right now than I am of AGI taking over the world.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Ryan. That was a really great question. We didn't talk specifically about pop culture. Would you like to give a sentence? What is the role of AGI in pop culture, and how is AI represented in pop culture?
Well, ever since I've been involved with the field, which is near when it started to become a very active field, um, movies in particular that the science fiction writers
Mhm.
got captivated by AI, but always portrayed it as evil. I mean, always at the end, the robot kills all the people or something close to that. And I've always felt that was very unfair because we've seen no evidence of ill intent by any robots yet. But I mean, there's also the reality of who funds it and what are their goals. And for example, I mean, wonderful, amazing work has been done at places like Stanford on robots that can make a plan based on a goal and figure out how to implement the plan and execute it and so on. And then you visit the closed lab over at SRI, which used to stand for Stanford Research Institute, and you see, pretty mobile robots running around with automated rifles on top of them, and you start to think, oh my God, what if the software had a bug? What if it got into the wrong hands, et cetera? So there's certainly plenty of reasons in a sort of grand scheme of things to say we need to be really careful about how we do work. I think what we need is essentially the Hippocratic Oath for computer scientists,
Mm,
equivalent of do no harm.
yeah,
But I don't think we should stop doing the work. I think we should be much more thoughtful about it and regulate it.
right. Which is very challenging,
Yeah.
but we are working on it. One more question. What are the big differences between the early days of AI and now? What key developments have led to today's AI? And maybe that can lead us into the future.
Yes, yes. It is an important thing for people to realize. In the early days, we had not very powerful computers by factors of millions. And there's something called Moore's Law, which basically says the capability of our computers doubles every 18 months, right? And so if you think back how many years that's been,
Whoa.
quite a bit more power, right? So first of all, we had much less powerful computers. We also had much, much less data. We didn't have the internet, or the internet was just emerging as the ARPANET in those days. So we didn't have, all of the writings of mankind available, of humankind available on a place where you could collect it all and analyze it,
Right.
right? We're also using these symbolic methods, and the symbolic methods had the problem of, there were amazing good systems built to solve very narrow tasks. So for example, Like I worked on one that could teach you the geography of South America, but some of the famous ones, or there was one called Mycin that could diagnose bacterial diseases. Not better than the very best human doctors, but better than most human doctors.
Wow.
So if you were in a rural area where you didn't have much access to medical care, you could use this system and figure out what treatment to give and so on. So the trouble is they were handcrafted. I mean, the guy who built Mycin, there was a team, but the lead guy was a PhD in computer science and an MD. You know, that's what it took to build those systems, right? That would take several years to build. And so funders became discouraged that it would take too long and cost too much, and we might never get there. So that's why there were winters and so on. Now, where we are now is we have these systems that have basically been trained, and sometimes self-trained, by just collecting huge amounts of data and analyzing it.
You said they self-train?
There's possible, it's called labeled training and unlabeled training. Unlabeled training means they basically figuring out the labels themselves as they go. And that's one of the things that scares people, by the way.
Well, they self-train and we have
Right.
the mass amounts of data that it needs,
Right.
and they don't take a year or a PhD in computer science to build them now. So,
Well, it's true that you can have students, for example, you can have even like middle school students can train something to recognize a happy face versus a sad face and things like that, right?
right.
So, but one of the problems with the current stuff is it's hard, even for the people who built them, to explain how they work at the level of what is this neuron and these billions of neurons that we have artificially, what does that one stand for, right? Is that the one that's telling me that it's a woman versus a man, and therefore I can reject the job application because it's a woman, which is one of the problems with some of the current AI systems? No, and in general, the systems can't explain themselves. Now, there's obviously starting to be exceptions and ways to get around that. But one of the things I think is the early systems could explain themselves. Mycin could tell you why it was that they believed that this particular patient had this particular disease, and this is why you should give this dosage of this medicine, right? And so if a doctor's trying to decide whether to take the advice, they might have rather the behavior of the old system, even though you wouldn't limit yourself to just bacterial therapy. If you were building one today using modern methods, you'd like, let's do all of medicine, or all of at least, infectious disease or something like that. And so one of the things that I wonder about is if we could bring some of those ideas from the old days together with the most modern systems, could we get systems that were really capable and could explain themselves, and that we could understand better how they actually work?
That is a great question to end on.
Okay.
I think we'll all have to sit with that for a bit. I wish we could ask so many more questions, but thank you so much. I think I learned a lot. And Dr. M is having me wrap up.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you,
so
Mirelle.
much. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Dr.
Thank
Mark
you.
Miller and Mirelle Castańeda. Thank you. So with that, I am going to move us on to the next part of our webinar. We are going to go into breakout rooms now. So if you know which grade you teach and you teach just one, you have an easy time deciding. But we're going to give you a little preview here of what we're doing. So in the K2 room, we are going to be talking about how a computer can recognize drawings. Vicki, do you want to speak a little bit about your essential question?
Yes, we're talking about how technology has already affected the way that we tell stories visually, and how it will continue to change with technology in the future with AI technologies. So,
Great, thank you, Vicki. In 3.5, we have Dr. Amy Iguchi, who is here with her 3.5 appropriate lesson. Tell us one sentence about what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so it's similar to K2, but it more in depth, and then just engage students in discussion about what is good and what's not for the humans.
Great, thank you. And then middle school's coming up in 6.8. We're talking about algorithmic bias and machine learning. Daniel and Kat, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so here we're going to be having the students do a couple of demos and games that illustrate algorithmic bias and what kind of impact that can have. And then, of course, having the students create their own AI and trying to find bias in that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then in high school, we have Matt Johnson's going to give us a framework for understanding disruptive innovation. Go for it, Matt.
Well, that is the essence of it. So this was my attempt to help my students start making sense of disruptive innovation. With a lot of young technical whiz kids, this is not necessarily something they see the downside of. So I want them to be able to see both the good and the bad.
Good luck, everyone. Happy CS Ed Week. Thank you so much for being here with us.